You know what will cut your risk, my risk, her risk, everybody's risk of heart attack and stroke by 75 to 80%? Do you know what will cut your risk, my risk, her risk, everybody's risk of heart attack and stroke by 75 to 80%? And you don't have to swallow a thing? And you don't have to swallow a thing? Do you know what that might be? It's called, do you know what that might be? It's called... Now, if word ever got out about that, what would happen to the sales of anti-cholesterol medications? What would happen to the sales of anti-cholesterol medications? Because anti-cholesterol medications cannot drop the heart attack and stroke risk by 75 to 80%. Cannot drop the heart attack and stroke risk by 75 to 80%. If we're going to pay attention to cholesterol at all, the thing that's been proven long ago to pay attention to is the ratios between the types of cholesterol and not the absolute number itself. If a person's total cholesterol, let's say, is 300, oh my gosh, that's too high. But their good cholesterol, the HDL, happens to be 85 or 90, the ratio is 3.2, 3.3 to 1. That's well within a average risk, I should say lower than average risk range. For men, 5 to 1 gets you from average to too high for the risk ratio. For women, it's a 4.5. But if we just judge that 300 and we don't take into account the 85 or 90, which, by the way, is not uncommon for women. Women have better ratios. If we don't take that into account, then somebody's going to be feeding us a statin drug or trying to feed us a statin drug. And we really don't need it because we haven't got any extra risk even from the cholesterol point of view. There's another ratio between the so-called bad cholesterol, the LDL, and the HDL. And if one really wants to get fancy, one can send the blood test off to a lab that breaks it down into all kinds of, not just HDL and LDL and total cholesterol, but into all kinds of cholesterol fractions, and this is a bad one, this is a good one, and one can figure out the ratios from there. So one never accepts it, ever, please, folks, on the basis of the single number itself. First, look at your ratios to see if you've really got risk. But then let's look at something very fundamental. What is the point of paying attention to cholesterol? The point is said to be prevention of heart attack and stroke, isn't it? All right. Do you know what will cut your risk, my risk, her risk, everybody's risk of heart attack and stroke by 75 to 80%? And you don't have to swallow a thing? Do you know what that might be? It's called donating blood. It's called donating blood. There is research on that from the 1990s, late 1990s. A whole bunch of guys followed for an average of 8 years each. The guys who donated blood once or twice a year had 75% less heart attack and stroke during that time. No kidding. And then there's more research from Scandinavia with a much larger bunch of men. Same deal. The guys who donated blood once or twice a year had 75 to 80% less risk of heart attack and stroke. Now, if word ever got out about that, what would happen to the sales of anti-cholesterol medications? Because anti-cholesterol medications cannot drop the heart attack and stroke risk by 75 to 80%. What the problem is very simple. It's called blood being thicker than it should be. When blood is too thick, it abrades the walls of the arteries. This is not original with me. Everyone get the book by Dr. Ken Kenzie, K-E-N-S-E-Y, and Young Cho, C-H-O-E. It's called The Origins of Atherosclerosis. You'll find it online, used books, it's inexpensive. Please get that book. What these doctors explain is that thick blood is abrasive. It abrades the walls at the branch points of the arteries. If it's just flowing down a tube, no biggie, but if it has to branch, it's going to abrade, it sets up whorls, it sets up eddies. And that abrasion causes inflammation. And the inflammation, you've all heard about cardiovascular inflammation. If it gets bad enough, what shall I say, covered over, what covers it over? cholesterol-containing plaque. The cholesterol is partially, not completely, but it's partially a response to cardiovascular inflammation. So yes, it is somewhat of a predictor because it means you're more inflamed, but it's not the cause of the inflammation. It's something that's trying to get in there and help. Now ask any regular physician, what's the normal blood viscosity? Okay, let's talk in terms of the hematocrit. That's just the concentration of red blood cells in total blood volume. What's the average for women? It's 5 points less than men. Men don't have bleeding periods once a month. Men don't lose blood once a month. And so their blood remains thicker. It's 5 points thicker on this hematocrit scale than a woman's on the average. What happens to a woman after menopause? Her hematocrit starts to go up. She's not losing blood every month anymore. By the time she's 60, she's just as much at risk as a man for a heart attack and stroke. And it's not entirely because her estrogen went down. Now, it is true, it's partially due to that. But if a woman have her body do what it did when she was younger, namely get rid of some blood from time to time, her risk of heart attack and stroke will go down by 75 to 80% too. They can't patent that, and they can't put it on TV and tell you how bad it is at the end, and, you know, there's all these possible side effects and complications. And not only that, folks, we're doing ourselves some good, and that person down the road who gets that unit of blood in an emergency, we're doing them some good too. And I'm not a paid spokesman for the American Association of Blood Banks. This is for the person themselves. What I think about cholesterol is it's interesting, and we need to look at the ratios, but it's a response to cardiovascular inflammation. What we really need to do is stop the inflammation. What we want to do with anything in healthcare, if we can, if we ever get bright enough, is to look for the cause. And the cause of that inflammation is mostly, I won't say entirely, but mostly the abrasion. Dr. Kenneth Kinsey and Dr. Young Cho, The Origin of Atherosclerosis, that's the book. Donate some blood. You'll cut your risk of heart attack and stroke dramatically. You know what? You won't have to pay me either because the blood bank will do it for free.